For most of us, fire is something that we fear. But for some people, it is a thrill. And for one man, it was his weapon and his signature. He set over 2,000 fires, caused millions of dollars of damage, and he killed 4 people in one single blaze. For years, no one suspected that the man setting these fires was the same man that came rushing in with a fire hose and a badge, pretending to be a hero. This is the twisted story of California's deadliest fire chief, John Leonard Orr. Hi, my name is Tasha, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. Today we are creating a burned or blistered hand because I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of arsonists actually burn themselves, especially their hands. Too bad today's arsonist didn't burn his hands. He didn't set fires that way, but he definitely deserved it. We are talking about a fire chief who had this burning desire to set massive fires.
That makes no sense.
If you like this type of content, please subscribe or like this video. It's the easiest way to support me and to see more of my face. I will have my other platforms listed below, but let's go ahead and jump right into the reason why you're here. On October 10th, 1984, Jim Obden was a 19-year-old clerk at a local Ollie's Home Center in Pasadena, California. At around 7 p.m., he heard an emergency alert come over the PA system, so he started rushing toward the front of the store towards the exit. But before Jim could get to the front of the store, he ran into this huge smoke cloud. Well, smoke cloud doesn't quite describe what it was. It was more like a big, black, massive wall. Like he could not pass through it, but it was smoke. When Jim turned around to go back, he was near the hardware department and he noticed there were a lot of customers still in the hardware department. They weren't even exiting the store yet. So he starts alerting them that there's a fire and that they need to follow him out of the store. Well, in the middle of him leading this big group of people out of the store, they lose power. So now there are no lights. There's just darkness and billowing smoke everywhere. This fire went from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. So now the customers are really panicking because they don't know enough about this store to be able to navigate it in the dark in the middle of a fire. They scatter all different directions. Firefighters describe the scene as hellish because number 1, the fire was massive. Number 2, it was burning really hot. And number 3, there was no visibility for them to even be able to assist the people that were trapped inside. Jim finally made it to the exit, but 4 other people died terrible deaths in that fire, including a 2-year-old little boy named Matthew Trottle and his grandmother, Ada Deal. Jimmy Satina and Caroline Krause also died in that fire. They were store employees. Less important, but still a loss, was the $1.5 million in damage that this fire caused. So anytime there's a fire, there has to be an investigation. Arson investigators did come out and they looked for what's called the point of origin. It's where the fire started. Well, at the Ollie's fire, they couldn't find a point of origin and they ended up closing the case as an accidental fire. There was one investigator that did not believe that this was an accidental fire. He was 100% sure that this was an arson. And that arson investigator's name was John Leonard Orr. John was one of the first to arrive at the scene and he had taken a bunch of pictures. And according to, arson science, he was saying that these pictures prove that this was arson. This was not an accident. John felt like the point of origin was this bin of highly flammable patio cushions that was in the store. Now, although John was very firm in his belief that this was arson, no one supported his theory. But once a second Ollie store went up in flames the exact same way, there was no question to a lot of investigators that this was in fact arson. For some reason, the first Ollie's fire got closed as an electrical issue, even though there was another Ollie's fire the exact same way, and a lot of the investigators started to believe that it actually was arson. They still didn't reopen that case. They just kept it closed as an electrical problem. I don't know. I think maybe they didn't want the public to think that Ollie's was being targeted, like it would hurt their business or their sales or something. I don't know. But it was being targeted. So people should have known. Let me know your theories below on why they did that. After Ollie's, there were several more fires in Bakersfield, California. One of them was at a craft store called Craft Mart. This time, investigators caught a break when they found what they believed the arsonist used to start this fire. Now, some people say that this was actually found in the Ollie's store, but according to forensic files, it was in the Craft Mart fire. The fire starter they found was 3 matches tied around a cigarette with a rubber band, and there was a little scrap of paper that they believed the arsonist used to create an envelope, like a pocket of air, because otherwise the cigarette might just get put out. Investigators believe that the arsonist was using a cigarette because it was slow burning and he would have time to get out of the store. That same day, there was another fire in a fabric store where the arsonist set a bin of pillows on fire. After this, fires started breaking out all over Bakersfield, California, and they were finding those little fire starters at so many of the scenes. I guess sometimes it would burn completely up and there would be no evidence, but then other times it would only like partially burn. Either way, that confirmed to the arson investigators that this was the same arsonist. In the years that followed the Ollie's fire, Northern LA was absolutely brutalized by fires. There is an arsonist on the loose, and California is already like a playground for wildfires. The strong winds make it really easy for small fires to get really, really massive like that. But investigators started noticing a pattern with these fires. They basically would all be between the hours of 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. They would mostly be in alleyways, carports, or garages, and they were always started inside of trash cans. Glendale seemed to be the arsonist's favorite spot because so many fires were set there. In 1985, the reported arsons were up 78% from the year before. So they ended up putting together this special arson unit, and they didn't have a lot of investigators to spare, so there were only 2 people on the team. John Leonard Orr. The other investigator's name was Dennis Wilson. Even though Glendale knew that they had an arsonist on the loose, a lot of other fire departments weren't so quick to come to that same conclusion, at least publicly. A lot of times when they were asked about an arsonist, they would say, well, we're not ruling it out, but there's no evidence that tells us definitively that there is an arsonist on the loose. Which is crazy to me because those little cigarette match fire starter things were being found at so many scenes, not just in Glendale, like all over Northern California. They didn't want to commit to that theory publicly. Dennis Wilson was eventually replaced in this arson unit, and he was replaced by a man named Douglas Staubs, and he worked with John Orr for about a year and a half. Douglas said in the year and a half that he worked for the Glendale Fire Department, he saw more fires than the rest of his career combined. It was around this time that the arsonist earned himself the name the coin tosser. And the reason they started calling him the coin tosser was because those little fire starters that they were finding everywhere, well, he started attaching coins to them to give them some weight. So when he would throw them like in a bin of pillows, it would sink to the bottom instead of being on top or being halfway through. The coin tosser was getting bolder with every single fire. He was getting so bold that people started coming forward with witness descriptions of a strange man being at these fires. At one arson scene, the store manager was able to escape through a back door, and when she did, she ran into a police officer just standing in the empty alley. The manager told the officer that she was really worried about her elderly neighbor because of the fire. Instantly, this police officer jumps over the fence and supposedly rushes off to help this elderly man. Except no one ever sees this officer again, and no one ever went to check on the elderly man. Luckily, he was okay. Once they got the description of this man, investigators were convinced that this was the coin tosser dressed as a police officer. This wouldn't be the first time that the coin tosser was at a scene in disguise. There were also reports of a man matching this same description, and he was at the scene of one of the arsons dressed as a photographer taking pictures. There were so many fires being set at such a fast rate that investigators basically knew eventually the coin tosser was going to make a mistake. And that mistake came in January of 1987. So there was a conference in Fresno. It was a 2-day conference. There were over 200 attendees expected, and this was a conference for arson investigators. The first day of this conference, a string of fires broke out all up and down Highway 99, and this continued for 3 days. So it continued through the whole conference and one day after. These fires started out very small and got progressively worse. The worst fire caused over $300,000 in damage. And most of these fires were started just within hours of each other, so the fire departments were spread very thin. It was honestly a blessing that so many of these fires were small because they wouldn't be able to keep up. At one of these small fires, a store clerk was walking past right as the fire was getting started, so they were able to extinguish it before it grew. The extinguisher left this white film at the point of origin, which was a basket of dried flowers or synthetic flowers, but basically the fire starter was preserved inside of there and it hadn't burned almost at all. The yellow paper that served as the envelope for this fire starter was much bigger than the scrap they had before. While investigators sent off the evidence to be tested, a new investigator stepped onto the scene named Marvin Casey. Marvin was actually the one that put together that all of these fires happened the same time as a arson conference. He also found a trail of fires that basically led from Fresno to Bakersfield. He thought the coin tosser seemed very knowledgeable about fires, about how to start them, how to get them to spread, and most importantly, how the fire department would respond. Marvin became pretty convinced that his arsonist was an arson investigator, so he requested the names of every single person that attended that conference, and then he made his own separate list of every person that attended that conference that would use Highway 99. He narrowed that list down to 55 possible people that would take that same route to get to the conference. Marvin did share his theory, but most people were pretty skeptical. His superiors even refused to pull the prints of those 55 people because they felt like it was a waste of time and there was no way that one of their own, an arson investigator, was setting these fires. Just the fact that Marvin even brought this up pretty much made him be shunned by his peers. 2 years later in Pacific Grove, California, there was another arson investigators conference, and there was another string of fires that broke out the exact same way, but this time it was on Highway 101. Marvin, who was still convinced that this was an arson investigator, cross-referenced the list from the prior conference and this conference, and there were only 10 people who attended both that would take both of those highways on their route home. This time, Marvin's superiors agreed to pull those 10 prints and send them off to be compared. That large scrap of yellow paper from the previous conference that they sent off to be analyzed, well, they found a fingerprint on it. Surprisingly, when they made the comparison, there were no matches, which basically devastated Marvin because he was 100% convinced that his arsonist was on that list. There was another 2-year gap, and then basically the same cycle repeated. There was an arson investigators conference and there was a string of fires that broke out. This time it was in LA. The lead investigator's name was Mike Matassa, and Mike was the first person to give Marvin's theory about the arsonist being an investigator some serious thought. Like, it made sense to him, and he didn't have any misguided loyalties. He knew that anybody could be an arsonist. On a hunch, he decided to go to LA County Sheriff's Office and have them run that print against anybody that had ever applied. The print came back to the right ring finger of John Leonard Orr. John Leonard Orr was born April 26, 1949 in Los Angeles, California. His parents divorced when he was really young, and his father, a World War II vet, was described as cold, strict, and not exactly the nurturing type. John was described as shy and socially awkward. He craved the attention that he wasn't getting from his father, but he actually had no idea how to make connections with other people, so he was just alone. He wasn't really popular or athletic, but he was known to be super intelligent and very driven. John attended Los Angeles Valley College, where he studied fire science. He also joined the Air Force in the late 1960s, but that was pretty short-lived. He actually tried to join the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Fire Department, but he was rejected by both of them. He was rejected by the LAPD because he failed their psychological evaluations, which flagged him as potentially unstable or unfit for duty. He was rejected by the Los Angeles Fire Department because he failed the physical examination. This was really crushing for John, and for a while he just bounced around doing odd jobs, but it seems like those rejections basically fueled his fire to prove himself. He really wanted to be a firefighter. He eventually got hired with the Glendale Fire Department in 1981, and he worked his way up to fire captain and arson investigator. Despite his professional success, John had a real problem with interpersonal relationships. He had a very rocky marriage, and he was often described as arrogant, self-centered, and controlling. Even his colleagues found him really abrasive, but one thing they could not deny was how good John was at his job. John had a knack for pinpointing the cause of fires, which is a very hard thing to do. Think about fire scenes. Everything is destroyed. A lot of times it's covered in water damage. It leaves a mess, and there is a lot of stuff to sift through to be able to find what the cause was. And John was really good at that. And he was just a really hard worker. A lot of times he was the first to arrive on the scene. John's reputation as an arson expert grew, but as that grew, so did suspicious fires all through LA. John was also on that list of 10 names that had attended the first 2 arson investigators conferences. It turns out the person, because back then a person had to like sit down and physically examine fingerprints and compare them. Well, the expert that was doing that made a mistake. They just made a mistake. Humans make mistakes. They didn't rush to arrest John because even though they suspected him of being the serial arsonist, they only had enough evidence to tie him to one fire so far. And that fire was at the craft store where they got that paper with a fingerprint on it. The fire got put out early. It was like minimal damage. They knew he was going to have a minimal punishment. Investigators wanted to tie him to the massive string of arsons that was happening, and the first thing they did was put a tracker on his car. November 22nd, 1991, John's car was tracked to Warner Brothers Studios, where a reported fire broke out on one of the sets. Then his car was tracked going back home until he received a call from dispatch, and then it was tracked going back to the scene of the fire. The only problem with that is that initially when dispatch read the address of the fire, they read the wrong address. John's silly ass didn't notice that they read off the wrong address, and he went to the correct scene. He was the only one that went to the correct scene.
Stupid.
With that, a search warrant was granted for John's home and his car. Investigators found a briefcase in his house, and that briefcase contained cigarettes, rubber bands, matches, and yellow lined paper. Basically everything the coin tosser used to create his fire starters. They also found a videotape of this big, beautiful house on a California hillside, and then it just cuts to 18 months later, and that same house is in flames. One of the most damning pieces of evidence that they found in his home was a book script. And when I first heard this, I'm thinking, how incriminating can a book script be? It's not like he's gonna sit down and actually detail all of his arson. It's not like he's gonna make the main character a firefighter turned arsonist. It's not like he's gonna put details in this book that only the arsonist would know. Yeah, he did all of those things. On the surface, it did look like a work of fiction, but the more investigators read into this story, the more they found that it kind of read like a confession. The book told the story of a fireman named Aaron Stiles, who basically used his insider knowledge of fire behavior and also arson investigation to basically set fires and evade capture. Even more disturbing than that were the specific details about these fires inside the book. The book talked about how Aaron would start these fires using a cigarette, matches, rubber bands, and a yellow lined paper used as an envelope. The book talked about how Aaron would set multiple fires at the same time so that while the fire department was distracted with one fire, he could watch another one burn. There were also details about a fire that sounded very similar to the Ole's fire that was in South Pasadena, the one that killed 4 people. This fire became one of the most devastating fires that John Orr was linked to. In one part of the book, Aaron was sitting back and he was watching this building burn, and he was doing a bit of reflection. During this reflection, he realized that this was an addiction that he was feeding. He couldn't stop. He was even fantasizing about people dying in those fires. Although it wasn't a direct admission of guilt, there were so many similarities between fires in the book and fires that happened while John was with the Glendale Fire Department. The book revealed this psychological profile that basically confirmed everything that investigators already thought about the coin tosser. It confirmed the craving of attention, putting himself back at the scenes of the fires, and also having a feeling of superiority, feeling like he was so much better than other professionals in his field. John was charged with multiple counts of arson. He was also charged with 4 counts of murder for the people that died at that Ollie's fire. He was guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as he should have been. My only question was, what was he going to do with this book? Was he actually going to publish this book? Would he have been that dumb to publish the book before he got caught? Or was he just waiting to get caught and then thinking maybe he could make some money off of it afterward, which I'm pretty sure he can't? Maybe it was just his way of reliving these crimes. He could go back and read it for himself. Maybe he never planned on publishing. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Like, what do you think he was going to do with that book? What do you think it was for? Thank you so much for spending time with me. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more of me, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.